Hi everybody, I'm Brad. Recently I posted a video entitled Sony A6000 Review to YouTube where I laid out a number of the reasons why I had purchased Sony's A6000 camera. I've gotten a lot of likes and good responses to the video, so I thought I'd do a follow-up video now that I've had a chance to use the camera a little bit. One of the reasons I chose the A6000 is its small size. This camera is not a whole lot bigger than an iPhone. It's lightweight. It's very easy to carry around with you. Another reason I selected this camera was its price point. Already, the online retailers are beginning to discount this camera. You can buy the camera with a 16 to 50 millimeter kit lens, and then also the 55 to 210 zoom, which I refer to as the second kit lens, a second battery, and an SD card for under $1,000. So it's a very attractively priced camera kit. Third reason for choosing this camera is the APS-C sensor. The camera has the same sensor as most of the midline Canon and Nikon cameras, so on paper, this camera should do just as good as your middle-of-the-road Canon and Nikon cameras. A fourth reason I chose this camera was the great coverage that you get from the two kit lenses. Your 35 millimeter equivalent focal lengths are from 24 millimeter wide angle all the way up to a 315 millimeter zoom. A final reason I chose this camera was its ability to do videos. Today I shoot a lot more videos than I do still pictures. I like to do multiple camera shoots, and I felt like this camera, with its large sensor and its interchangeable lenses, would be a great addition to my two Panasonic camcorders. First, let's talk about this camera's ability to shoot stills. I was driving the other day and I saw some flowers in the ditch by the side of the road, so I decided to stop and take some pictures. I used the camera both in its scene mode on the macro. I couldn't really see any difference in those from the ones that I shot in aperture priority. Here's one of the pictures that I took. As you can see, the camera set the ISO at 100. This was taken with the kit lens zoomed all the way in. It was shot at f8 at 1/350th of a second. The camera had done a great job with its auto white balance, so I didn't set any white balance settings. Big mistake. The pictures came out with a really yellow cast. They were very jaundicey looking, and so I realized I really need to be more careful and set white balance. You can see the corrections I made on the histogram. I pulled my highlights down a little bit, raised my exposure just slightly, and then I had to make a slight correction towards blue and magenta to try to get the yellow tint out of the picture. This is another shot. You can see a little bit more radical processing. Brought my highlights down, exposure dropped it. I think I went a little bit crazy on saturation and then really brought it towards the magenta. So on the computer screen, this one really kind of cracks and pops. And then here we are. This shot was actually edited in Photoshop Elements. These are some of the other shots that I took, and you can see that the camera really liked being underexposed slightly. This is again the 50 millimeter lens. f5.6, very little depth of field, so if you're looking for bokeh, even at f5.6, this lens provides that. This was a little bit underexposed, a little richer color, and then this shot was also processed in Adobe Elements. This shot 1/500th of a second. This was actually a cropped image from this shot. This has very little processing or color correction, and this was a little bit more heavily processed. You can see I dropped the exposure, ran my highlights down on the histogram, increased contrast and saturation, increased sharpness definition, and then really pulled it out to get that yellow tint out. Again, look at the depth of field. This stamen is in focus. These that are just slightly in front of it are not. The pestle is in focus here, but it moves out of focus as it goes up. This was shot at f5.6. This shot was edited in Adobe Elements, and then I brought it in iPhoto and just denoised it a little bit. This is kind of an interesting shot. I don't know whether it was a mistake that I made in Elements. This shot seems to have quite a bit of noise. I had to do a lot of work to get it color balanced. I cropped it quite a bit, and this was shot with the 210 millimeter lens all the way open, so these other blades of grass and flowers were actually much further away from this one than they appear in this picture. So these are some samples of what the camera can do with still photography. Again, I think my takeaway is before I spend a lot of money on additional lenses or equipment, in today's digital photography, you really need to learn to use your post-processing software, whether that's iPhoto, Adobe Elements, Lightroom, Aperture, whatever you select. The camera is the first part of the picture, but then there's just so much that you can do in these different editing software. One other thing I'd like to show you is this camera gives you two format choices for your stills. You can shoot in 16:9, which is your video format, or you can shoot in 2:3. So your direct enlargements, of course, are going to be 4:6, the 12:18, and 20:30 sizes. Let me see if I can open a picture here in Editor. One feature I really like about the Photoshop Elements editor is when you brought your pictures in from your camera, if you have a particular size that you want to make, an 8:10, 11:14, 5:7, a size that's not native to your sensor, when you click crop, you can go down here and you can say, I want to make an 11:14 and key that in. Then when you put your crop box up, the computer constrains the crop box to that size, and so you can actually see what your print's going to look like when you then have it printed. This is a real helpful feature. Let me show you a couple of the pictures that I shot. I wanted to see what they look like printed. So I had this shot printed up as a 16:20, and then I had this shot printed as a 12:18. So let's take a look at those. Okay, hopefully the glare is not too terrible here. This is printed 12:18, and beside it, this is the little dandelion, and this is a 16:20. Back in my film days, I would have never even considered making a picture this large from a 35mm negative. I used to shoot 2 1/4 film cameras. 11:14 was about as big as I would comfortably go with film cameras. So you've got this teeny tiny little camera that can make these great 16:20 shots and the 12:18 shots. So if you get really close to them, you can nitpick them, but from a reasonable viewing distance, if you were going to hang these on the wall at your house or your office, they would really look nice. Okay, let's talk about this camera's video capabilities. With video, I went from being concerned to being really disappointed to being happy again. Let me tell you how that all happened. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm shooting a lot of video, and I do multi-camera shoots. What that means is I have multiple cameras in different locations around the room, and then I bring those into the new Final Cut Pro version 10 software, and I do what's called a multi-camera edit. What you do with that is you create what's called a multi-cam clip, and here's what that looks like. This is all the footage that was shot with the front camera. This is the footage from the side, and then this is your footage from your other cameras. Okay, the computer syncs these clips up, and you simply play the clip, and you can see all of your angles simultaneously, and you just select which angle you want to go into edit, just as you would if you were switching a production switcher. So you can see which angles are up. That's a shot from the Sony. These are my 2 Panasonics. This was a Memorial Day party, and again, if you want to see some sample footage from the A6000, if you just go to YouTube and you've found me, my YouTube channel is Brad Z Chef. If you just type that into the search box and hit enter, all of my videos will come up, and you can go to these videos from Circle of Noise, and you'll see what this camera can do as part of a group with the other cameras. That'll give you a chance to see its ability to focus and what it does. I shot video with both of the lenses on that day, so good opportunity. The Jailbreak, Born to Be Wild are both good songs to look at. Memorial Day, I was filming this band. It was outside. It was pretty hot. I got about 40 minutes in, and the camera overheated. So I ended up having to set it down, let it try to cool off. I'd pick it back up and it would overheat again. So we just kind of ended up finishing early that day. I was kind of disappointed, but it was a hot day and I just kind of wrote it off. Next, I did an indoor graduation and I used this as one of the 3 cameras on the indoor graduation. Let's take a look at that. Okay, same thing happened to me this day. I started the graduation, and these are the clips. I got in to the graduation about 23 minutes. Now this camera only records 30 minutes of video. At 23 minutes, there was a logical break in the program, so I just pushed the record button to let the camera quit recording, counted to 10, pushed the record button again, thinking, okay, I've got another 30 minutes of recording time. Well, the camera made it down here to 42 minutes total, and it overheated. This time I didn't set the camera down and let it rest. I just fired it right back up, made it record. When the camera's overheating, the white balance was a little screwy, so I had to come back in and redo that. I went from 42 minutes to got about 2.5 minutes of recording. The camera shut off again. Waited about 2 minutes and got about another 2 minutes. So you could see I was fighting with the camera. I'd turn it off, give it a minute or two to rest, turn it back on, and it would record for 2 minutes before it overheated again. Finally, I turned the camera back on and I had a program and I just started to fan the camera. And the camera went ahead and recorded the last 20 minutes with me standing there fanning it. Man, that was a less than ideal workflow, and I don't plan to do that again. At that point, I left that graduation and I was beginning to really feel bad about buying this camera. I thought this is not going to work as a third camera. And here's where I kind of have to take a rabbit trail. I was blaming the camera for something that was actually a problem I had with Final Cut. This new version of Final Cut does a really good job in that when you start to import your clips, you can stick your camera card in there, hit import, and the minute it starts importing, you can start editing. You don't have to wait for it to import. They used to call it log and transfer all the footage before you start editing. So I was doing that with these multi-camera clips, and I was having a terrible time with the computer to sync my clips. I was having to do most of it manually. Here's what I learned. When I want to do a multi-camera shoot and I want to use Final Cut to edit it, I need to put in the card, import the footage, let the footage import, and then give the computer time to go ahead and transcode and render that footage. Then I look up here and make sure that I've got some RAM that's clean. If not, I'll shut Final Cut down, open it back up, and then import my next camera card. The other thing that I learned was it's really important to go in and give each camera that you use a very distinct camera name and angle name. If you'll do those things, those 2 simple things, just take your time importing it and then rename your angles and name your cameras, then you can open up Final Cut and you can click New Multicam Clip and it'll assemble those clips and sync them just perfectly. So, having discovered that, I shot a church choir program. This time what I did was I set my 2 Panasonics at the back of the room. One was set for the entire stage, the venue camera, and then the other one was operated. They were getting head-to-toe shots. I took the Sony and I would simply walk around the room. I'd set it up, set up my shot, hit record, record my clip, push the record button again. I never turned the camera all the way off, but then I'd take and I'd go to my next location, set up my shot, and frame that. This is what the clip looks like. These were the clips from the Panasonics. They ran the entire time. But Final Cut was able to take my little clips from the Sony and just lay them in where it was appropriate, and you can see spacing them out. Using this shooting technique, the camera never overheated. It got me some really great shots, and so I went back to feeling really good about using this camera as a third video camera. So in conclusion, am I happy with the A6000? Absolutely. Would I buy it again? Absolutely. Even though I got off to a rocky start with the video, this camera with its interchangeable lenses and large sensor does a great job of getting the cameo shots or the B-roll shots that I need to edit in later.